Hello, I'm Reverend Dr. Britni Johnson of Being and Becoming Spiritual Retreat Center, and welcome to Blue Chair Conversations. Blue Chair Conversations explores the social, cultural, and political matters that are affecting the African American community and the church. A topic that many of us have been tight-lipped, closed eyes, and maybe even turned our backs on is the issue of domestic violence. But I have invited to the Blue Chair someone who is never silent when it comes to domestic violence. Miss Lisa Council is an overcomer of abuse, and she is the CEO of SHIFT, which stands for Self-Healing Ignites Flourishing Transformation. She will take a seat in the blue chair, and she is ready to have candid yet critical conversation about domestic violence. Miss Lisa will also help us understand why this is such a hush-hush topic in our homes as well as in the church. Domestic violence is a pattern of abusive behaviors used to gain or maintain control over another. This abuse can be physical, sexual, emotional, financial, psychological, and even technological. Considered a subset of domestic violence, intimate partner violence specifically occurs between individuals in a romantic relationship. The key difference between the two lies in the relationship. Domestic violence involves abuses against members of a household, not just between parents, but against children or against siblings. Whereas intimate partner violence is the abuse between romantic and sexual partners. Statistics suggest more than 40% of Black women experience intimate partner violence during their lifetime. Men can be victims of domestic and intimate partner violence as well. In one way, shape, or form, many of us have encountered, experienced, or been an eyewitness to the effects of domestic violence and intimate partner violence. These take place in our homes, at the neighbors down the street. They take place against children who are attending our schools nearby. They happen even to members in our church and those participants in the civic groups that we serve in. It escapes no age, race, gender, social, or star status, which has been made evident in the life of Ike and Tina, Chris Brown and Rihanna, and more recently, Keke Palmer and her ex Darius Jackson. But we really don't have to look that far. Although this isn't the usual downtime conversation, there could be a story of abuse in the person sitting right next to you, a story of intimidation and injury, a story of manipulation and humiliation, a story of fear and threatening behavior. Miss Lisa Council is committed to promoting healing and transformation for those victims and survivors of abuse. Part of her mission and ministry is to encourage, to educate, and inspire those so that they may live a life of vitality after their experience with domestic violence. And part of this aid is sharing her story of overcoming 33 years of abuse, low self-esteem, and personal tragedy. From abused to advocate, Ms. Lisa Council, welcome to Blue Chair Conversations.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Reverend Dr. Brittany. It's such a pleasure to be here. And just thank you for reaching out to me and just thinking enough of me to invite me into your sacred space. My name is Lisa Council, and I am a survivor of 33 years of domestic violence as far back as I can remember. Domestic violence started for me very young. As far as I can remember, I was around the age of 9 years old, and it started off verbally, and not more so from my parents, but I always had very low self esteem because, as you can see, I'm a dark skinned lady, and I have very long hair. And during the time that I was growing up, one of the things that a lot of dark skinned girls faced were we were not pretty. We were not pretty enough. I was often told that there was no way that I should have beautiful long hair um, because I was dark skinned. My only sister, she was a few shades lighter than me, not much lighter than me. We were always teased that we couldn't be sisters and we didn't have the same parents because one was a little lighter and one was a little darker. Um, so from that stage and age, I just had very low self confidence and self esteem, and that carried over into my teenage years. And I just wanted so much to be loved, or at least I thought to be loved, because at a in childhood you really don't know what that is, sort of outside of your household. And I was very loved at home, very well taken care of at home, but I just felt like there was something missing, and I honestly did not know what that was. My parents were very strict, so I wanted really badly to fit in. I wanted to fit in with my peers. I wanted to be cool. I wanted to hang out with the cool kids, whatever that means. And I honestly just wanted to fit in because my mom was so strict on us. And I realized later in life that what she was just trying to do is just make sure that we were safe, make sure that we were loved, and like any other parent, make sure that nothing happens to her babies. I did not understand that. So in middle school there was a young guy, and he liked me, I liked him, not knowing even what that looked like. I wanted him to be my boyfriend, not knowing what a boyfriend was. And we would occasionally talk on the phone. And one day after school, he asked me to come over to his house. Why don't you go over to my house after school? And I said yes, not even knowing or thinking what could happen. I didn't know his family. I didn't know much about him either. He was in the eighth grade. I was in the seventh grade. And I just wanted this young guy to like me. I just thought he was the absolute cutest. I really did. And I did go to his house. I knew I should be going home from school. I knew that I was going to get in trouble when I returned home. But I went to his home, and I was raped by him. And I was a virgin. I did say no, and he raped me. There was no one at his house. The thought never even crossed my mind to ask him, okay, who's going to be home with you? Where are your parents? Do you have siblings? Where are they? None of those things even registered in my mind. I just wanted him to like me, and I went home with him. As a result of that rape, I did become pregnant. When my mom found out that I was pregnant, she somehow or another was able to reach out to his mom, I guess through the school or whomever. I really don't know how all of that played out, but and his mom in turn told my mom that I was just a fast little girl. I did not have the baby. The baby, I was taken to get an abortion. The baby was aborted, and it was just something that we never discussed in our family again. My mom woke me up one morning and she said, "Get dressed," and we went off to a place, and that baby was aborted. From there, we moved to another side of town, and I started going to another middle school where I sort of took on I had given myself a new identity. And I kind of made a promise to myself that I will never even think about what happened again, because I really didn't understand what happened. Everything just happened so swiftly, and I had no time to process it. And of course, like I said, my parents, we never talked about it again. It was just one of those things that was brushed under the rug, just like we're sitting here right now, and it was just brushed under the rug. We did not talk about it. From there, in a new middle school, in a whole new environment, new children, new teachers, and everything, I went on to meet new friends, of course, but along the way, I just went into a vicious cycle of unhealthy relationships. By the time I was in high school, my high school boyfriend, he was a few years older than me. He was very abusive. And the way that he would coerce me into sort of coming back or taking him back is that he would give me lavish gifts that, of course, I couldn't afford myself. My parents, I'm not going to say that they couldn't afford it, but they wouldn't, think of giving a teenage child those things. And right out of high school, I decided that I was grown, 18 years of age, and hey, I'm moving out. And that's exactly what I did. I moved out. I moved with my boyfriend at the time, and we did get married. And before we even got to a place of becoming husband and wife, the relationship was very abusive. It was very rocky. He had total control over me. I had to do whatever he said. I had to answer to him. When I left for work, I had to let him know because he left earlier. When I returned home, I had to make sure that I phoned in to tell him that I was home. He had to know everywhere I was going. And during that time, one of the things a lot of people don't know about being in abusive relationships is an abuser makes certain that they isolate you from everyone. So all of my friends that I had, I just went missing in action. No one knew where I was. No one knew how to contact with me, but he never isolated me from my family. He could not do that. He didn't have that much control because I come from a very tight knit family. I never discussed with my parents or my siblings, what was going on. And one of the things he used to try to convince me to do was to have a baby. If we have a baby, everything would be okay. But you know what? God made it as such that at that time I could not get pregnant. I could not conceive a child. And I used to sneak and take birth control pills, and he would find my pills so I couldn't. But I knew that having a baby was not the answer. Just somewhere God was always in the back of my head, just saying no, that still voice, no, this is not going to be good. And so I could not get pregnant that throughout the duration of that marriage. I finally got up enough courage one day to say, I think about the age of 23, I said, I cannot do this anymore. I cannot live my life out this way anymore. I had so many dreams and I had so many aspirations and things that I wanted to do and accomplish. And I was just trying to see how that would look with me being in the marriage that I was in. I would get blamed for stuff that I didn't even do. I remember one time I had to take the car to go to the mall. And when I was leaving the mall, I had not realized that someone had taken the tags off of the car. My ex-husband accused me of paying someone to steal our tags. I know that may sound crazy or awkward, but he actually accused me of paying someone to steal our tags because we were supposed to be going out of town to visit his family that very next day. Um, and when I finally got up enough courage to tell him that I was leaving, I will never forget that night. He pulled a gun out and he put it to my head and he says, "You're not leaving me. You're not leaving this house. No one can have you but me." He had already convinced me that I wasn't cute enough. I wasn't smart enough. Nobody else would want me but him. And he told me that he would kill me if I tried to leave. And we laid in the bed that night, and I begged him to kill me. I said, because I cannot live this way. Shoot me, but make sure that I'm dead. I begged him to make sure that when you do shoot me, that I'm dead, because I would have rather been dead than to live the way that I was living. Um, I did leave, but I did come back maybe about a week later because domestic violence is just a vicious cycle, and the only way to explain it is like being on a merry-go-round. You just go around and around and around in a circle and in a pattern, and oftentimes victims enter seven or more unsafe or abusive relationships prior, they just keep going around and around in that circle because a lot of it is mental and emotional. Um, and so I went back, and when I did go back, his punishment to me was when I came back home, he had thrown all of my clothes away. I had no clothes. He had gotten rid of everything, meaning I had no clothes to wear to work. I had no clothes to go anywhere. So I had to start all over. And I sat in our home at the time for about a week. And then I said, you know what? I've had enough. I can't do this. And I did leave finally for good, and I filed for a divorce. Um, the day that we were going through the divorce hearing, I was sitting in the court building next to a gentleman that I did not know. There was a hallway full of us waiting, to go up before the judge. And there was just a gentleman sitting there, I guess, going through the same processes I was going through or waiting for his ex-wife to be. And my ex-husband made such a scene outside of the courtroom where he had to be almost asked to be escorted out because he accused this man that I did not know sitting here like we're sitting, saying, "This is your boyfriend. Is this why you want to leave me?" And I'm like, I don't know this man. I've never seen him, don't know who he is. And it was really chaotic. So when I stood before the judge and he asked me if there was any possibility of reconciliation, I said there is no way that there can be any, reconciliation. And I was granted a divorce. Um, but sadly for me, like many other victims, we go right back into that vicious cycle. And I kept going through that vicious cycle. The relationships may not have been physical abuse, but it was always, signs of verbal abuse, emotional abuse. And then it became so bad for me personally is that I didn't need anyone to abuse me physically, mentally, emotionally, verbally, because I became my own best abuser. I could look at myself in the mirror and say that you're beautiful and ugly in the same breath. I didn't need anyone to do it, to abuse me anymore because the words that I had been told for so many years, they just, they were just etched in my heart. And I found ways to sabotage anything that was good for me. If it was a job that I wanted, I would sabotage it. If it was just something that I wanted to do, I would figure out or find out a way to sabotage it. If it was good friends who wanted to surround themselves around me, I would figure out a way to sabotage the friendship because one of the things too is through, an abuser isolating their victims. I became so good at living my life in isolation and sort of in my own cocoon. And I became comfortable that way. And to this day, I still am pretty much a loner. And throughout the years, I have come out of my shell, but I find that my safest place is when I'm sort of isolated and in my cocoon. I just feel safe right there in that cocoon, and that's because I just live. I was taught or made to live my life that way in isolation.
Domestic violence disproportionately affects Black women, often escalating from emotional and physical abuse to fatal outcomes. In the United States, Black women are nearly 3 times more likely to be killed by an intimate partner than white women. Intimate partner violence accounts for a significant portion of homicides among Black women, who experience higher rates of domestic violence overall. The presence of a firearm increases the risk of homicide by 500%, amplifying the dangers they face.
In 1993, I tragically lost my only sister to domestic violence. My sister was 5 years older than I was. She was my hero. We were total opposite. She was the quiet one. the one who always listened to whatever she was told to do, never got into any trouble. I, on the other hand, was the younger one, feisty, talkative, always talking back, always getting in trouble. And the sad part about it is that as close as my sister and I were, we never discussed the unhealthy relationships that we were both in. The subject never came up. The subject of domestic violence never came up. The subject of, even the things that I was going through. Hey, can you come and help me? I'm going through this. None of that ever transpired. And I often sit back now and wonder, how and why did that not come about? How is it that as close as we were, we never discussed the unhealthy relationships and marriages that we were both in? On July 18th, 1993, my sister's husband called my parents at 2:46 in the morning, and he informed my parents that when he got home from work, my sister was not there. Um, my parents knew very early on that that could not be the case, because my sister had two daughters and she would never leave her daughters alone. Not only that, she couldn't see at night, so she would never be driving that time of morning, by herself. And after he called my parents, he called me and asked me would I come over and help with my two nieces, who were 8 and 3 at the time. And the funny thing is that I could not go to help him with my nieces, is because my abuser at the time had me locked in the house. He had taken my car. In the apartment that we lived in, the gate locked from the outside in. So I was in, we had bars on the windows. So I couldn't, so the front door and the back door of our apartment, which was more set up like a condominium, I would not have been able to get out the front door nor the back door, because when I opened the door, the gate was then locked from the outside. And, I informed my brother-in-law at the time, as much as I would love to come over and help you with the girls, I can't, because I can't get out of the house. And I did not articulate that to him. I just said, I can't get over there right now. I don't have a car. And I called my parents and informed my parents that my brother-in-law called and asked me if I could come over. And my mom just immediately started crying. And she said, Lisa, please don't go. But what I did not share with her or my dad either is that, well, I can't go, even if I wanted to. And my mom just said to me simply, she says, something isn't right. I just feel in my spirit that something is not right. And, we'll sort of work through this. And so that following day, July 19th, is when we discovered that my sister had been brutally murdered by her husband, who had put her foot down because she had gotten tired of the abuse. And what we didn't know is that earlier during that week, she had thrown him out of the house, and he came back to kill her. And he did so in the presence of their 8-year-old and 3-year-old daughter. And if you don't mind, I just want to stop and just share a picture of my only sister, Linda, whose voice was silenced in 1993 due to domestic violence. What I always like to share with everyone is, this is a face of domestic violence. And I'm a face of, a victim of domestic violence. And oftentimes, in society, we sort of put in our heads what a victim looks like, what an abuser looks like. And I'm just here to say to you and anyone that there is no profile. It looks like this. It looks like me. And on the other hand, I can be an abuser as well. They look like me. They look like you. There is no profile, absolutely none whatsoever. It could be Your mom, your dad, your auntie, your uncle, your pastor, your sister, your brother, um, your peer, little kids, because it's a learned behavior. It starts from a child, seeing something and emulating it. So it's a learned behavior. No one is born into this world wanting to be an abuser. It is a learned behavior. It is learned often at an early age. And what happens is when you are children and you are witnessing domestic violence, because oftentimes victims think that, okay, well, I'm being abused, but my children aren't. But if your child is in a household where abuse is taking place, your children are victims of domestic violence. It's just as simple as that. And it's just a matter of time before something happens to them. So what we do in essence is we're teaching our children that domestic violence is okay when we're living in it.
And this is where the unconscious addiction.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And that's something I learned. That is exactly what I learned. This is where your unconscious addiction to domestic violence began. And then you, in your mind, unconsciously think that it's okay. So it can have one or two sides. Either you're teaching a child that the abuse is okay and it's all right to be a victim, or you're teaching them too that it's okay to abuse someone. And then oftentimes what you'll find is that a child is growing up and they have so much anger built up inside of them, and then that anger can become misplaced anger, and then you're taking it out on those that you love or those that you're close to. And it just becomes years and years and years of a cycle, or what we call a generational curses. Mm-hmm. And the only way to break that curse is to what? We have to get help. We have to get help. What we find oftentimes when we're discussing and talking about domestic violence is we always focus on the awareness of domestic violence. We have Domestic Violence Awareness Month in October. But guess what? Domestic violence takes place every single day, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And we all know that we all are aware that domestic violence exists, right? So the only way that we can break those cycles and break those generational curses that are in all of our families is to focus on the educational piece of it. What does it come from? Where does it stem from? What can we do to stop it? How do we educate ourselves? When do we start? Do we start in high school? Oftentimes I used to volunteer very closely with an organization called Domestic Violence Wears Many Tags, and we would go into high schools. But you know what? By that time, it's too late. It is too late, because our children are seeing it at homes. You know what? Even when they're in the wombs. Even when they're in the womb, you know what? If you're singing to your baby when it's in the womb, they get those happy thoughts, so they come out healthy. But if a baby is inside of his mother's womb and is hearing arguing, fussing, fighting, there's chaos, that baby may be born with, that baby may be, come out of the mother's womb shaking and nervous and suffering from PTSD, and we don't even know it. Because I remember when, I'll use my daughter for an example. My daughter in my womb, she always kicked her right leg, always. Mm-hmm. Whenever something was going on, her right leg was always kicking. And when my daughter was born, I paid very close attention to her behavior. And whenever she's worked up, or whenever she's nervous or she's anxious, that right leg just kicks. It just kicks. It just kicks. It just kicks. And that came from, I stem back from, the chaos that she was sort of dealing with when she was in my womb. And it's just interesting, even as now, as her as a young adult, that I'm like, okay, is everything okay? Because I'll start to notice that the right leg just starts going and it'll just go nonstop. And I'm like, settle down, is everything okay? And you know what? Unconsciously, she doesn't even realize that it's taking place. She doesn't. And I just had to, bring it to her attention one day. But we have to focus on the educational side and part of domestic violence, even when we talk about in our churches, because as Christians and in the church, we operate out of a place of forgiveness, because that's what we are taught, that's what the Bible tells us to do. And oftentimes what we see as advocates and as victims, especially, is that our pastors and our leaders oftentimes send us back home into those unhealthy and abusive relationships. Oh, if you just work it out, or if you just get counseling, oh, if you just forgive. Um, and what they don't understand is, because they don't have the educational piece or side of it, is that you send your victims and your abusers right back home. And what we find oftentimes, sadly, as um, advocates of domestic violence, is that it just causes a trickle effect. People end up like my sister, whether it be the victim or the abusers. We've seen it time and time and time again. And so we have to, yes, stay in a place, in a posture of forgiving. But we also have to get down to the dynamics of, educating our churches, educating our pastors, having domestic violence programs within our churches, and in our schools, because for the Black community, that's where we go for help, right? We go to our churches, right?
Yes, this part of having this blue chair conversation is to help us get educated on what domestic violence is, how can we support not only victims but get rehab to those who are abusers.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I've observed in time that it seems that some of the messaging in the Black church can actually enable some of the domestic violence, and that's their messaging around submission, male headship, and also you had mentioned that you were married and you were divorced, and a lot of times they misinterpret scriptures about wives submit to your husbands, or God detests divorce.
Yes.
The man is the head of the wife.
Yes.
So if we can just kind of get a hold of our messaging, have a gospel that is anti-domestic violence, I think that is part of our education.
Absolutely.
But even getting access to resources, yes, the scriptures bring peace. Yes, prayer helps out with the healing process.
Yes, absolutely.
But we have to go beyond prayer and meditation.
Yes.
Get access to building a network where we can have contact with crisis centers.
Yes, absolutely.
Counseling services, government agencies that provide recovery and rehab.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Both victims and abusers sit and serve in our church each Sunday. And while the Black church has been a place where important issues concerning the Black community is addressed, the Black church has been mostly silent on this particular issue. Black church culture can contribute to the enablement of abuse. It has been common for women to be encouraged to stay in their abusive relationships. These cultural church barriers can prevent women from speaking out against their abusers and getting the help that they actually need. And as Christians, we rely on the word of God to restore and give balance to our lives, to bring us peace. The scriptures bring healing. The prayer brings healing. But the church must go beyond the preaching and the teaching and do the work of developing networks with crisis centers and other resources to help both the victim and the abuser. It is the business of the church to minister to both. And one of the ways I do encourage churches to support healing is to change its verbal and nonverbal messages, promote equity. Sermons ought to speak against male domination and abuse. Messages of the gospel ought to demonstrate anti-domestic violence, church operation ought to communicate that males and females are equal partners.
Um, one of the things, one of the main reasons why I did not um, file for divorce um, is because of the church being a Christian embarrassment. Mm. And it wasn't until I went to my pastor and we sat down and we talked very openly in Catholic church, and this is what I said I want to do. And he was the one who sat me down and said, Lisa, there is no need to be embarrassed. There is no need to feel guilty. He would say, do you think that God will want you to be in an abusive, marriage or relationship? And it wasn't until then that a red light bulb went off in my head, and I'm like, oh my goodness. And I'm like, okay. And my marriage was I had already gotten the divorce, but of course in Catholic church your divorce has to be annulled, or it isn't seen, or it isn't deemed divorce. And it wasn't until then that a burden was lifted off of my shoulder. But we do absolutely, as a church, have to get better about the whole domestic violence piece. And that does, it looks like, having, crisis centers, maybe within our churches. I know that a lot of churches now within the DMV, they do that, District, Maryland, Virginia. I know a few churches that do it. And I also know a few churches within Maryland, DC and Virginia that often they have annual conferences and symposiums. And honestly, I'm just going to sit here and just let anyone know that that isn't enough. An annual event or symposium is not enough. Saying same things every single year or teaching the same things is not enough. And why are we doing it? Are we just doing it to say that, hey, my church has done something, or hey, my community has done something, and we can move on from there? That just isn't enough. We have to make sure that our pastors, again, are educated. And you know what? In our communities, in the African American communities, you and I both know that we have lived by or been taught and brought up by a standard is that therapy or going to, a psychiatrist, a psychologist, whatever it is that you need, a psychotherapist, is taboo. We don't do that. We go to our churches and we pray to God for healing. But guess what? God created doctors. God created doctors who have scientists who have made medications. Sometimes you may need a therapist and medication and your pastor.
I'm so glad that the Black community it's still taboo, but
yes,
we're recognizing we need therapy. And
yes, absolutely, so absolutely. And God has given us those things. He has given us those people. He has given us those tools. And I have actually sat in churches where I've heard a pastor say, oh, all you need is Jesus, or you can heal, or you can get through that addiction without anything. But you know what? That may look okay for you, or that may be okay for you, but it may not be the best thing for Lisa, because we are both different. We deal with things differently. We handle things differently. Words may not affect Britni, but they may affect Lisa. That little girl who was dark skinned and had very long hair, when those words were said to her, she took them to heart very personally. That may have not been the case for Reverend Dr. Britni, though. There was a thing that we used to say when we were kids: sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Words are so dangerous, and words have so much power. And it's something that I like to always say to people when I'm talking, is that you can put a Band-Aid on a cut, a scratch, and it'll heal, right? Mm-hmm. But you can't put a Band-Aid on words.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk about how you provide healing and transformation? Because domestic abuse leaves you with scars, even though you have healing. So there's the scars of the memories, there's the scars of the deep hurt.
Yes.
How do you help victims and survivors with the healing process?
It looks different for everyone. And making sure that you view yourself and that you know yourself as an individual. You and I could have possibly gone through the same type of abuse, but it affected us differently. And so just recognizing and realizing that you are an individual, and your hurt and your pain is not going to look the same as everyone else's, nor is your healing journey. Oftentimes when we're going through that journey of healing, Lisa wants her healing to look like Reverend Dr. Britni's, and it's not, because we're two different people. So I like to just give them, just love on them, give them the tools. The one thing I like to use are affirmations. I like to assure them that they're not alone. I like to assure them that their feelings are valid. Because oftentimes an abuser will just break you down and make you think it's you, but your feelings are valid. Also, forgiving yourself, that's a piece of it, because oftentimes we blame ourselves. But to get down to those intricate details and all of that comes along with your healing journey is realizing that it's ongoing. It never stops. And that there are going to be pain points. You're going to have to go through some of those pain points in order for you to come out to the other side. And when God is healing us and shaping us and molding us, you may go through those pain points and you just may want to give up. But I always try to assure anyone that I come into contact with is that what God is doing is He's taking a layer of the onion at a time, and He's peeling it back, and then He takes another layer and He's peeling it back, and then oftentimes for Him to do that, He has to take you back to maybe where it all started, and you have to realize where it all started. I didn't know where mine started until I started going to a therapist. I thought it started at 13. It didn't. It actually started at 9, or maybe even before then. And it's because we want to take so many of those painful memories or pain points in our lives, and we want to cover it up and we want to mask it. And we try to trick ourselves into believing that, oh, I'm okay, because I haven't dealt with that yet. But what I always like to tell people, and I use myself for an example, the monster didn't start coming out for me until I became a mom. And I had no clue what was going on with me, what was going on around me. And that behavior was being moved on to my daughter. And because no one ever prepared me for that. I had never talked to anyone. I had never gone through a therapist. I'm like, oh, I'm healed, I'm good, this will be okay. But that's what, when I became a mom, that's when the monster for me became full circle. And when I tell you that the one principle that I do live by is that if you want peace and if you want total healing, the one principle is being truthful. That's it. Being truthful.
So what I'm hearing is that healing is a process.
It's a process.
And we're all going to heal in different ways.
Yes.
Particularly because we experience domestic violence and intimate partner violence in different ways.
Absolutely.
And you shared many different types of domestic violence experiences from you.
Yes.
I don't know if you saw The Color Purple,
but
yes. You shared that you were looking for love in silly, was looking for love as well.
Celie was looking for love.
And and in my observations of that movie, and it's, Fantasia was the person who played Celie. Yes. She herself has had violence against her as a woman, experienced rape as well. And her portrayal of this, I observed emotional and physical domestic violence against Celie. Could you share a little bit about the different types? Because I know there's emotional, there's psychological, economical, technological, all these different types of domestic violence. You have experienced most of them, isolation. Could you just touch on some different types of domestic violence?
Yes. So in our society, most people are often knowledgeable about physical abuse and sexual abuse, and of course, verbal abuse. But what a lot of people don't realize is there's so many other tags to domestic violence. And the first one is verbal. Abuse is always going to start off with verbal words. It could be someone just saying, "Hey girl, you're ugly," and then turn around and say, "Oh, I'm just kidding." You always want to be wary of that. And those bad words just keep coming. Someone constantly putting you down, it just keeps coming. And then it escalates to emotional abuse, where they're doing things to you, such as verbal abuse, but they're blaming it back on you. And it becomes emotional, okay? So, it's embedded in your brain, it's embedded in your heart. And like I said, those words just seep down, and there's just no way to escape them or get away from them. And so our abusers will start to turn the behavior on to us, like, "Oh, I act this way because you make me act that way, or I act this way because you're just in my way, or I act this way because you're always doing, this or that." And it becomes emotional abuse, and to the point where Reverend Dr. Britni is saying, "Well, what is wrong with me? Why am I always making this person feel that way?" And then it lingers on to sexual abuse, which a lot of people don't understand. It lingers on into sexual abuse. And even in a marriage, if you don't understand anything else today, is realize that no means no. Even in a marriage, we find that women and men are constantly raped and sexually abused in their marriages for various reasons. Someone can be emotionally abusing you, and then the next minute they turn around and they want to be intimate with you. And you said, no, that is rape. You have been raped. You have been sexually abused. And then the next tag would be financial abuse, where your abuser is taking your checks. Your abuser is taking the children's tuition. Your abuser is maybe the only one in the household who's bringing in income, and they're keeping income from you to do the things that need to be done. Or you're the breadwinner, and your abuser is, before you can even pay a bill, you've had to relinquish your check over to them. I'm going to put a lock on this refrigerator so that your children can't eat. And it can be abuse in the spiritual realm, where you have a pastor or someone in the church, even a lay person in the church, who is using the scripture against you to do the things that they want to do to you that are not of God. We find that a lot of times we have men or women that may go to a pastor or, someone in the church and say, "I'm going through this." And then they start to manipulate you, play emotional and mind games with you to get you to do what they want to do to you. And then guess what? A lot of people always put physical abuse at the top without even realize that that's the last tag. An abuser does not ever have to put their hands on you for it to be abuse. That's the last tag. The last tags becomes the beatings, the whoopings, the shovings, the throwing down the stairs, beating you in front of your friends and your families, beating you in front of your children, coming to your job, beating you on your job. I used to work with a lady who her husband would come to work with her every single day at payday. and he would beat her out front of the job in front of everyone. And you know what was so significant about that whole scenario is that she was a big tall lady and he was a little fella. And he would beat her coming and going for breakfast, lunch, and dinner until she relinquished over her paycheck or her bank card to him every payday. So I just, I want people to keep in mind and be aware of the tags of domestic violence, but also be aware of the red flags, especially when it comes to our teens and our young adults. If a peer is, coercing you to give them your phone, let me look at your phone. Let me see who's texting you. Let me see who you're talking about. Oh, you can't wear this, or you shouldn't wear that. If they're calling you 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times a day, that's not healthy. That is not what a healthy relationship or friendship look like. If they're always putting their hands on you and just tugging you and taunting you, that's not what a healthy friendship or relationship look like. And it can be more so dangerous for our young teens and adults is because as adults, we don't oftentimes know how to deal with our emotions, right? So you can imagine when you're dealing with teenagers not knowing how to be able to process their emotions, and then it becomes violent. Like we're getting ready to go into February, and that's our month for teen dating violence, where you have a significant amount of teens, boys and girls, who are abused by their peers. When we go into the schools, the girls, they are worse than the boys. And our boys and our men, they have nowhere to go to for help, because that's again a cliche. A man is teased when they reach out and say, hey, I'm being abused. A boy is teased, and they're taught very early. It goes back to the teachings that we teach at home. Oh, man up. A man doesn't cry. A boy does not cry. You're being a sucker, and these are things that men and boys are taught at a very early age. So who do they go to when they need help?
So briefly, we touched on the societal shame as it relates to boys and men.
Yes.
I would like you to kind of share, like, when people are trying to escape this cycle.
Yes.
Because I understand that this is one of the most dangerous times.
Absolutely.
You said you left, came back, you left again. Your sister voiced that she wanted to leave, and she was met with death.
Yes.
So if you could share, how can someone set up their safeguard as they're trying to make an escape?
So it's very important to know that you should never do what I did, and that's just pack up and leave. You put yourself in danger. During the time when you're even thinking about wanting to leave an abusive relationship, please know that your chances of being murdered increases by 75 to 80% if you decide that you want to leave an abusive relationship on your own. If there is a firearm in the house, statistics show that your chances of being murdered increases by 500% if you decide to leave an abusive household on your own. 75%, we're talking 0 to 75. And then we're talking 0 to 500%. My sister is one of the 75 and 500 percentage, because she put her husband out without telling anybody and without any type of plan in place. So if you get up enough courage to say that you're ready to leave and you've done and you've had enough, one of the key principles is to try to keep things the same. You don't want to start switching up and changing up your behavior too abruptly around your abuser, because then they're going to know something's wrong. Because guess what? Abusers are very clever. They know you oftentimes better than you know yourself, because they've shaped and molded and groomed you. They know your comings and goings. They know where you work. They know where your children go to school. They know where your family and friends live. They know all of your habits and your movements. So you want to try to make certain that you are not switching up your behavior too fast and too soon. Two, document everything somewhere secretly, where your abuser can't get to it. Three, make certain that you aren't just telling any and everyone who your abuser may have access to. Oftentimes we want to tell our mom, we want to tell our cousin, we want to tell Reverend Dr. Britni, we want to tell, our cousins or best friends. Your abuser has access to them. You've taken up for him or her in front of them several times. He blocked your eye and you told your mom and your dad that the dog did it. I'm being honest. You've made him or her look like such the good, significant other, when you know that when you go home, you're going to get beat up. Time and time again. So make sure that you have a safety plan in place. Make sure that you have an emergency bag packed and left somewhere in safety and, confidentially. Make sure that you have some money set aside confidentially. Make sure that you may even have like a extra cell phone somewhere safely. Make sure that you have your social security card, your birth certificate, your children's information, all of, school records somewhere safely and out of reach where he or she can't have access to it. And like I said, make sure if you can that you're working with a professional advocate who can advocate along the way for you, or maybe, document things down confidentially, and maybe going to court dates if you have to go to court dates. Make sure that you're saying the right words to officers of the law. Sometimes when you're not saying those right words, one of the very questions that an officer will ask you is, do you feel unsafe? And if your answer is no, you can pretty much just throw that out the window. But then also make sure that if you're willing to go forward and if you're willing to go to court, if you're willing to get those stay away orders that you need to get, protective orders, that you are adhering to those as well. And that you're having someone there with you, honestly, who can just guide you through the process. There are many advocates out here who can guide you through the process, but never think that you are equipped to do it on your own. And when you leave, don't go back. Because what happens is when you do go back, you have now given your abuser the ammunition to amp up the behavior. Oh, she's not scared of my words. The mental abuse isn't working. The emotional abuse isn't working. The sexual abuse isn't working. So now we have to take it a step further. We have to amp this thing up. The beatings may come in, or your kids may not be off limits, because see, now they have to make you even more afraid than you already were or are. And honestly, I say this in all honesty and in as sincere and in genuinely as I can. Go knowing, honestly, that you're putting your life in danger. Honestly, I was putting my life in danger when I left my husband. And I knew that because I knew what type of gentleman, I can't even say gentleman, but I knew what type of man I was married to. And I knew that when I did leave the first and the second time, that I had to walk with my head over my shoulder. I had to be looking in the bushes. I had to be aware of everywhere I was going, because he would pop up out of nowhere. I could be at the hairdresser and boom, there he was. As much as I was trying to keep up and clock everything that he was doing the same thing to me as well. And boom, There is coming out the bushes somewhere. So you have to keep all of those things in mind, and you have to utilize resources that are out here. And in one of those ways that you can get resources that you may need is through the domestic violence hotline, which is online. And also you can reach them over the phone at 1-800-799-7233. But do not think that you can escape on your own, because you are putting yourself in grave danger. Grave danger.
Thank you for sharing that hotline number as well.
Yes.
A lot of people don't get to hear the story about journey to justice as it relates to domestic violence. And I know your family did go through some legal steps. Do you mind sharing any light on that?
Yeah, so, it's a hard thing, of course, and it's a very painful thing. And I can't even come up with words to describe the pain that my family and I have gone through or are still going through on a daily basis. Um, Merely losing a loved one is just not the end, especially when it comes to any type of violence. And one of the things that my family and I have had to go through for the past 30 years is parole hearings. So my sister's husband received a 20-year to life sentence with the possibility of parole. So I may be wrong. Let me take that back. I believe it was a 15-year to life sentence with the possibility of parole. So once that individual reaches that peak of that, I'll say 15 years, they are automatically eligible for parole. And you go through the parole hearing process where the the um, the family can or cannot be present, and we've always vowed to be present, in honor of my sister, and to make sure that we continue this fight on for my sister, because she deserves justice. She was a mom. She was a child. She was a child of God. She was a sister. She was a cousin. She was a granddaughter. And so what we want to do is make sure that we continue to be Linda's voice, because he thought that he silenced her. But what he didn't know is that he just made our voices stronger. And she lives in each of us. So when we started to go through the parole process, of course, we didn't know what to expect. You go into this room. It could be in person or not in person. Oftentimes virtual, because we live more so in the virtual world now. And this individual who has taken your loved one states their case, or why they feel like they should be paroled. And oftentimes what you'll find is that that individual, in their minds, are just thinking, I've served my time and I want to come home. I want to be free. I have served my time. And to be honest with you, that comes with a level of forgiveness on both parts. And forgiveness can be a tricky thing, because again, it goes back to, we are taught as Christians to be forgivers. But that can be hard. And that forgiveness piece it's a piece between you and God. Not you and anyone else. You and God. And it can be hard, just like that healing process. But what we found is that you never get over the nightmare of losing that person, but then also the nightmare never goes away, because you know that when you're going through the parole process, what happens is, after that first initial parole hearing, if that individual is not granted parole, you have to then go through the parole process every 1 to 2 to 3 years. So for us, it started out one time, and then we've been on a cycle where we've gone up for parole now 6 times, and we're going up for the seventh this year, as a matter of fact, in October of 2024. And so the nightmare just sort of never goes away, because you're looking on the other side of the lens of the camera, or on the computer, or a face to face, looking at this individual who has taken a loved one's life, and they're pleading for their freedom. And it's just one of those things where it honestly can't be explained. And if I can be at all transparent, Reverend Dr. Britni, I just want to share how my sister was murdered. My sister was shot in the head 4 times at close range. She was stabbed 32 times in the upper torso, and her skull was completely crushed. And she was left in her own storage room in her home to die by her husband. Her 2 children at the time, their children, 8 and 3, witnessed their mother being murdered. My 8-year-old niece at the time, who witnessed the abuse time and time again, I guess she kind of wanted to take on the role as my sister's protector. She wanted to protect her mommy. She wanted to call the police. But this particular night when he carried out his act, he made sure that the phone was off the hook and she couldn't find any phones. After he murdered his wife in front of their children, he raped my 8-year-old niece. And he threatened that if she ever told anyone, he would kill her. See, that became her punishment, because she was always mommy's savior. And now, what did I say? An abuser has to escalate that behavior, right? So his behavior that night became, not only have I killed your mama, I have to rape you now and do something so brutal that you will be scared for me for the rest of your life, that you would never, ever tell. And we knew from the start that something was wrong with my niece, and something drastic had to happen besides her witnessing her mother being raped. And my parents went on to raise her. But my niece didn't come forward until 2020. She is now 39 years old. And it wasn't until 2020, during a parole hearing, that she got up enough courage to say, I'm ready to say what happened to me now. We always knew. But as a supportive family, we never forced her. We never said, this is what you have to do. This is what you need to do. We always gave her the space to do it in her time. And she decided to come forward during a parole hearing in 2020, during the time of the pandemic. And so now we're on this journey as a family to make sure that we continue to carry out Linda's legacy and fight for justice for Linda. And like I said, that's the criminal justice system. It could be helpful, but then again, they have so many laws in different states that they have to adhere to, and you may not think it's fair as a family. And so God has just been with us on this journey where he has not been paroled one day. I mean, where he has not been paroled, but we also have to live within our minds and our hearts consciously that he will be paroled one day. And then how does that look? What do we do, and where do we go from there? Because he received a life sentence, life with the possibility of parole. That means he'll be paroled one day. So how does that look? And then you also have to live with the side of, does he deserve to be paroled? We know that God is a God of second chances. But you also live with the fact is, where's our second chance? we'll never get her back, ever. She lives here, in here, but we want her here with us. Did she deserve to die the way that she died? Did her children deserve to witness their mother being murdered, brutally murdered? And oftentimes too, what people don't understand is these type of instances break families apart. They destroy families. My niece and her sister do not see each other and have a relationship because he was my youngest niece's biological father, but he adopted my older niece. So he was not her biological dad. So his family received custody of the youngest child, because a lot of people don't understand too is that although he murdered his wife, he's still the living parent of a child. So he has full rights to her, even if he's in prison. So you have to understand the laws too. My parents fought years and years and years to try to get, custody. But he had all of this say so, because even though he murdered his wife, he was still, her parent. And he has all legal custody of her, even though he's in prison, all legal custody. So those dynamics change the structure of our family. And so now we have a niece and my sister, my sister's two daughters do not have a relationship because it's torn there. You know, dad killed our mom, but dad is still my biological dad, and he's not another one's biological dad. So my parents automatically had rights to the oldest daughter. And you've had one daughter who's gotten all of the love and time and attention and everything they need, minus a mom. But then you have another one who is torn because they have to go on what that side of the family tells them. And they were never given the truth. She was never given the truth. And so we have to think about all that takes place when we're dealing with domestic violence. There are so many other ugly sides to it, just besides the going through it, which is absolutely ugly. But then there are even uglier sides. And that comes with knowing that this thing destroys the family unit. And as Christians too, we know that Satan's mission is to destroy the family unit, especially the Black family unit. So if he can do that, he thinks in his mind that he's won. And he doesn't work alone. He works with others. He has a whole camp around him who works together, and so we have to be educated. We have to become educated. We have to stick together. We have to use our voices. We cannot remain silent when it comes to domestic violence. We cannot. It's not going to stop if we keep our voices closed or if we close a blind eye. And so we have to use our voices. We have to use our voices, and we have to share our testimonies, and we have to not only share them. My desire is to be as open and honest and transparent as I possibly can, because one, I know that this is God calling on my life, and I can't help anyone if I'm not being open and honest and transparent, no matter how ugly or brutal or painful it may seem and sound. If I'm not being open and honest, I have not fulfilled God's calling on my life. And that's just honestly, Reverend Dr. Britni, that's my desire.
Ms. Lisa Council, thank you so much for joining me on the Blue Chair. I feel equipped and empowered to have more conversation like this with family, friends, and those who are dear and near to me, particularly in the church. To everyone else, thank you for joining me for Blue Chair Conversations. If you would like to suggest a topic, or if you would like to join me on the Blue Chair, please connect with me at BritniJohnson.com.